Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are going to be tackling something really personal, I think, but it sparks such a huge debate. A woman's right to choose what she wears. You send in some really interesting sources about it. They go into history, cultural pressures, the fight for true freedom of expression. I think it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really amazing how clothing, something we kind of just take for granted, can become this huge battleground for, control, identity, even basic safety.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. What were some of your biggest takeaways or, aha moments when you were reading through these sources?
Honestly, the thing that really struck me was just how throughout history, societies have tried to control women's bodies through what they wear. It's not even just about fashion, it's about power.
Yeah, it's like clothing becomes a language, almost, for these societal norms, right? Exactly, yeah. And the sources you sent, and they had some really, really fascinating examples. There was this one article that talked about how corset design in the 19th century actually changed over time to reflect different ideas about women's roles. So, early on, they really emphasized this tiny waist, but then later designs allowed for more movement and flexibility as more women entered the workforce. It's like you can actually see those power dynamics shifting right there in the clothing.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. Yeah, and that kind of makes me think about that article you sent about dress codes in schools. It seems like even today, clothing is used to enforce certain ideas about what's appropriate, especially for girls.
Exactly right. And a lot of the time, those ideas are rooted in really outdated notions of modesty and control. You actually sent me this one study, I think it was, and it found that girls were way more likely to be disciplined for dress code violations than boys. And this is even for wearing similar clothing, which kind of makes you wonder, are these rules actually about professionalism, or are they about controlling girls' bodies and self-expression?
That's such a good point. And it all feeds into this bigger issue of the double standard, which you highlighted, where women's clothing choices are judged so much more harshly than men's.
Yeah, it's almost as if what a woman wears is automatically interpreted as a message rather than just, a personal choice. Like if a woman wears a short skirt, it's seen as like a provocation, but a man in shorts is just, wearing shorts.
Ugh, it's so true. I remember one of the sources, I think it was a personal essay, that talked about this woman's experience of being harassed while wearing a tank top and feeling like she had somehow invited that negative attention, like it was her fault. It's just so frustrating that women feel this pressure to police their own clothing choices just to avoid unwanted attention or judgment.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to that idea that women's bodies are often seen as public property somehow, subject to constant societal commentary and control. It's like their clothing choices are somehow a reflection on everyone but themselves.
Which is, totally absurd, obviously. And it makes me think about that really powerful Simone de Beauvoir quote that you highlighted, the one that goes, "On ne naît pas femme, on le devient." One is not born a woman, but rather becomes one. How do you think that idea ties into what we're talking about here with clothing and these societal expectations?
Oh, that quote is so relevant to this because it really gets at the fact that femininity is not something you're just born with. It's something that's constructed by society. And clothing plays a huge role in that construction. Right from when they're little, girls are just bombarded with all these messages about what they should or shouldn't wear, how to be ladylike, how to attract or not attract attention.
Like clothing becomes this tool for teaching girls how to, perform their gender, almost, right?
Exactly. And it's not even just about appearance, it's about behavior too.
Yeah.
Think about all the unspoken rules around, how women should act or move in certain outfits.
Oh yeah, like don't cross your legs in a short skirt or whatever.
It's all part of this larger system of social conditioning.
So we're basically internalizing all these expectations from such a young age that we don't even realize how much they're actually influencing our choices.
Right. That's exactly right, yeah. And that's why it's so important to talk about true freedom of dress, which is really about breaking free from those expectations and reclaiming that right to just choose how we want to present ourselves in the world.
Yeah, one of the things that really resonated with me in those sources you sent was this idea that freedom of dress is kind of multifaceted. It's not just about wearing whatever you want. It's about so much more than that.
Oh, absolutely. It's a complex issue with a lot of, different layers. And one of the most important aspects of it is the right to safety. Women should be able to wear what they choose without being afraid of, harassment, judgment, or even violence.
In one of your notes, you highlighted the story of this woman who was verbally assaulted for wearing a hijab. And it's heartbreaking that something as simple as choosing to cover your hair can be met with such hostility and aggression.
Yeah, it really is. And it speaks to these really deep-seated biases and prejudices that still exist around women's bodies and their clothing choices. And it also highlights why safety is such a crucial element of true freedom of dress. Like, women should just be able to move through the world without feeling threatened or unsafe because of what they're wearing, right?
Totally. It shouldn't matter what they're wearing. Whether it's a mini skirt or a hijab, a woman's clothing should never be seen as an invitation or justification for harassment.
Exactly. And that leads us to another key aspect of freedom of dress, which is autonomy. So it's about women having, the agency to make their own decisions about their bodies and how they present themselves to the world, free from external pressures or expectations.
Like that old saying, my body, my choice, right? And it applies just as much to what we wear as it does to any other aspect of our bodily autonomy.
I completely agree. It's about women having that right to express themselves authentically through their clothing choices and, in every other way without feeling like they have to conform to some kind of, arbitrary standard.
Right. But it's not just about avoiding negative consequences, right? It's also about the positive aspects of self-expression and feeling good in your own skin.
Oh, that's such an important point, because true freedom of dress is also about celebrating individuality and just embracing the joy of personal style. It's about feeling confident and comfortable in your own clothes, regardless of what, anyone else might think.
I keep thinking back to all those sources that talked about historical examples of women using clothing as a tool of empowerment. Like the suffragettes demanding the right to vote in their pantsuits, or the women burning their bras in the 60s as a symbol of liberation. It's so inspiring to see how clothing can be used to challenge the status quo and make these, really powerful statements.
Yeah, it's a really good reminder that fashion can be a form of protest, It can be a way to reclaim your agency and celebrate your individuality. And thankfully, we're seeing some positive trends emerging in the fashion world today that really reflect these values.
Yeah, it definitely feels like there's a shift happening, like a move toward more inclusive fashion that really celebrates diversity and individuality.
Definitely. We're seeing a lot more brands embracing body positivity, showcasing diverse models, and designing clothes that cater to, a much wider range of body types and personal styles. It's refreshing to see the industry kind of moving away from those really narrow and, often unattainable beauty standards.
Yeah, one of the articles you sent even mentioned the rise of these gender-neutral clothing lines, which is, it's interesting to see how fashion is starting to break down those traditional gender binaries.
That's a really great example of how the conversation is evolving. And it's not just about clothing design.
Right.
It's about challenging those outdated dress codes we were talking about earlier. More companies are moving toward dress codes that focus on, professionalism and functionality.
Rather than these arbitrary rules about hemlines and necklines.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it's about respecting employees' individuality and allowing them to express themselves authentically while still, maintaining a professional environment.
Okay, so we talked about the history, the double standards, the kind of multifaceted nature of freedom of dress, but I think the question that's probably on everyone's mind is, what can we do to actually create a world where women truly have the freedom to wear what they choose without, fear or judgment?
That's a big question, but I think it starts with, awareness. We need to really examine our own biases and assumptions about what women wear. Like, why do certain outfits make us uncomfortable? What judgments are we making based solely on someone's clothing choices?
Yeah, it's about challenging those deep-seated societal norms that we often just take for granted. Like, why do we automatically associate a short skirt with promiscuity? Or why do we assume that a woman in a hijab is oppressed?
Exactly. Those are the kinds of questions we really need to be asking ourselves. And it's not just about our thoughts either, It's about our words and our actions too. Like, we can avoid making comments about women's appearance, even if we think they're compliments, because you never really know how those comments might be received or what insecurities they might trigger.
One thing that I found really helpful in the sources you sent was the emphasis on being an active bystander. If you see someone being harassed or discriminated against because of their clothing, speak up. Don't just stand there and let it happen.
Absolutely, yeah. Silence is complicity. We need to create a culture where those kinds of behaviors are just, simply not tolerated. It's about being an ally and showing that you stand with women who are fighting for their right to safety, autonomy, and self-expression.
You love that. Because it's about recognizing that this isn't just a women's issue, it's a societal issue. We all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world for everyone.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I think what's become really clear throughout this deep dive is that true freedom of dress is about so much more than just, the clothes themselves. It's about respecting women's agency, their autonomy, and their right to exist in the world without fear or judgment.
It's about creating a world where everyone feels empowered to express their unique individuality through their clothing choices without, facing negative consequences.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe in that world we'll see even more creativity and joy expressed through fashion.
That's such a thought-provoking way to end this conversation. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this has given you some new insights and maybe even inspired you to take action. Until next time.